Gen Z are the most resourceful. There's a problem, we will find a way to solve it, but it will look very different to the way that any other generation has solved a problem before.
Yeah.
It's like in math, if we had to show our working out for solving problems next to generations, every single generation would have a different way to be able to solve a problem.
We're getting perceptions of laziness or not willing to work hard because in some senses, things are more accessible and are just simply more at the fingertips. But in other ways, we have a whole core set of skills within Gen Z that we need to be integrating into the classroom and leveraging as well.
They learn and process information differently. And this is critical for educators to understand if we are going to effectively support young people as they navigate school and then into working life. And we can't have these assumptions that they just know how to do these things that we would consider.
Podcast acknowledges the true and traditional custodians of the land we meet on here today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respect to elders past and present and are grateful to be on this country.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you.
When the students start to riot,
I'll be here for you.
even if your coffee's gone cold,
I'll be here for you. 'Cause you're there for them too.
Hello and welcome back to Podcast. This is the podcast if you are someone who works with young people, whether that be a teacher, a parent, a youth facilitator. If you have a young person in your life, hopefully you'll have a takeaway from this potty. You are joined as always by your hosts, Skye Hughes, that would be me.
it's you.
Amanda Marshall, that would be me.
Wilson Massara, that would be me.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm being so pointed, but that's okay.
It's fun. Let's go.
And today's episode is the one about teaching Gen Z.
I bet we're well into term one at this point, I'm pretty sure. And the questions are getting asked. How?
How do we do this?
How do we do this?
And it's interesting, right? So Gen Z are often labelled as like disengaged, they're labelled as lazy, they're labelled as entitled, they're labelled as lacking work ethic, that they can't stay, committed to a task, they don't have a long attention span, all of these things. But is any of it really true? And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably have your own experience or opinions or thoughts about Gen Z, but like opportunity for all of us to just come from a place of curiosity and notice what we notice and think about the Gen Zs in our worlds that we are supporting and how we can maybe do this a little bit more effectively.
And just for context, if you're unsure where the generations kind of sit, so primary school students are Gen Alpha, secondary school students are Gen Z, and Gen Z go all the way up to about 28, 29 years old.
So also in the context of not just they're not just your students, but they're also likely your colleagues too.
Yeah,
Yes.
100%.
And so generations are defined, which I learned doing a whole bunch of research recently, not by like the year chunks that are, it's not just like this generation is this year to this year, but how do you actually know when a new generation starts? And it's about what's happening to that population.
That defines the generation.
Yeah. So like
what's happening to Gen Beta?
Yes, my baby's going to be a Gen Beta. But
child.
Gen Z, there's like so much that's happened in their world, right? They lived through the global financial crisis. They watched parents lose their jobs. They're the first true digital natives that we have that have literally grown up with technology. They are a social media driven culture, and they've really been defined by globalization. And when we talk about globalization, we're just talking about this new accessibility that we have for everything. Like, avocados are an example of cultural globalization, and Black Friday sales are an example of, globalization of traditions and things that stick. And these are things that are just norm. This is the norm for Gen Z. This is the world that they're growing up in. Amanda, I know you mentioned last week that Gen Z is the first generation that's never had to use a corded phone. A phone that's like got a cord attached to a wall. Will's like, what's that?
Yeah. And Gen Z is also, I think we hear and we talk so much about these agitations, and the reason we're doing this episode about teaching Gen Z is because we know that there are agitations with the Gen Z are frustrating the education system and workplaces as they enter workplaces.
And similarly, Gen Z are feeling the agitations from other generations.
Yeah.
Yes. And when we get down to the crux of it, and we're going to unpack a whole lot of things today, but when we get down to the crux of it, what we're realizing is that the natural skill sets that were a byproduct of growing up, say for a millennial or for a boomer, the natural skill sets we're seeing from Gen Z they're different to the byproducts of previous generations.
Yeah. So they learn and process information differently. And this is critical for educators to understand if we are going to effectively support young people as they navigate school and then into working life. And we can't have these assumptions that they just know how to do these things that we would consider, we don't like using the term like soft skills, more like human skills, but that we have this expectation that they know how to make a phone call or to send an email.
Because
or
they've
never
had to make a phone call to make an appointment. They've never had to pull over to the side of the road and ask a person for directions to get somewhere.
And if you're fellow Zoomer listening, this isn't like if you do know how to do these things, or if you like, it's not a conversation of whether you're not intelligent, right?
Absolutely
not at all.
It's just different.
It's different, and the assumption, the things that the teachers are getting frustrated by, and also Gen Z are getting frustrated by equally, are the assumptions of the skills that we already know, which are the things that aren't happening, the things that we no longer experience because of technology, the things that we no longer experience because we are so connected, the things of like the searching for something, right? We can do it within seconds. I don't know. Did you use like the big books in your day?
Encyclopedia Britannica, actually. And I'm aware that I was quite privileged to have access to Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah, exactly. But like we don't have to do that level of research, whereas we have other skills that are different and research looks different for Gen Z.
Yes, which may be where we're getting perceptions of laziness or not willing to work hard, because in some senses things are more accessible and are just simply more at the fingertips. But in other ways, we have a whole core set of skills within Gen Z that we need to be integrating into the classroom and leveraging as well.
Because there are a set of, I guess, core characteristics that kind of help to define Gen Z learners that do separate them from maybe the way or the more traditional formats of learning that we've had. And it really is up to us to meet students where they are. So we can adapt our teaching practice to better suit our learners. And why shouldn't we or wouldn't we be doing that? And often the way that they learn actually makes our jobs easier as educators as well.
Yeah.
So Will, what is one of the first core characteristics? You've kind of touched on it already.
The first one is how tech savvy and resourceful we are. We even when we heard from Millie last week, she brought it up as well. It's like Gen Z are the most resourceful. There's a problem, we will find a way to solve it, but it will look very different to the way that any other generation has solved a problem before.
Yeah.
It's like if in math you have to show you're working out. If we had to show our working out for solving problems next to generations, every single generation would have a different way to be able to solve a problem.
Ooh, I love
a cool
that
visual.
And I noticed that even sometimes between like you and I, a couple of times last year, I wanted to work something out, and whether it was something with a website or, you know, I was learning a new skill, and I know that you're quite equipped in that area. And so I would ask you a question and your response would be like, hang on, let me just Google it and find out. And so I noticed that happen a few times. And so I noticed that my inclination was to ask you because I perceive you as having the answer, and you're immediately like, oh, let me find out.
And this would be
you
like,
go and
as a
find the
kid, I
answer.
remember being so frustrated by my parents doing this, right? Because it would be like, you're going to do exactly what I'm going to do. It's like, that you could figure it out the same speed as I could figure it out by just doing what I'm going to do.
Which is hard, right? And we can choose to like feel that rub and be like, oh, I just wish they would do it my way. Or we can like lean in and learn and maybe also, I don't know, make our
Googling
jobs.
something for us is like walking.
Yeah.
You've always been able to do it.
Yeah,
It's
so
like
true.
It's like
I mean, a tiny bit ableist, but yes.
yes, sorry. Apologies. Not very inclusive of me. But like it's always been there, right?
Yeah.
There's never been a period in the majority, I don't know when
Well, it's
when
even
Google was
more. Maybe
founded.
it's like breathing. Like it's a completely natural. Like you don't. It
It's
doesn't.
subconscious. You don't have to think about it to
Yeah.
actively
always
do
there.
it.
Yeah.
So yes, we're very
So
digital
the tech
natives and
savvy,
resourceful.
they're very resourceful. What else?
They are also highly independent and highly collaborative. So Gen Z really value their independent, really, and are highly values driven and collaborative, and like collaborating with like-minded, values driven individuals.
Yeah.
Wow,
They
coincidence.
also, a lot of Gen Z are more that, you know, when we look at like data and survey data of Gen Z, they're quite visual learners. And that's as a result of the tech-driven world that they're growing up in. So they like video content and infographics and graphs. A way that they can quickly absorb and learn information is what's best for them. And they're very ethical and purpose-driven. Like we said, they want to do things that align with their values, that make a difference in the world and aren't just for the sake of doing something. They want to know why.
So what we'd love to do now that we've looked at kind of the core characteristics of Gen Z is we'd love to unpack, well, what are the key, I guess, like challenges for educators or facilitators in meeting Gen Z where they're at. And what we know statistically is that Gen Z have the shortest attention span of any generation, and that is...
Gen Alpha, I'll test that theory.
Okay, thank you. So, okay. And that's due to the fast-paced nature of finding things out and social media influences and how quickly and easily we can now get a dopamine hit in our brain. So therefore it's like how long are we going to focus and how long are we willing to wait to get a dopamine hit in a classroom, for example. And so bridging that attention gap is one of the core challenges.
And like we need to find a way to do it as well. I get frustrated by the conversation of like, oh, Gen Z don't have an attention span. It's like, yes, and also you now have a responsibility to solve that problem.
Yeah, and I think too, like often it's
not to solve the
mislabeled.
big
Like
world
we know
problem,
that
but-
there are effective things we can do, like storytelling, for example, is proven to enhance and increase a young person's attention. Everyone's like short form content is the thing, long form content doesn't work anymore. Well, that just like doesn't happen anymore. Like we have to be able to be willing to adapt and change. And use storytelling in our practice. We need to acknowledge young people's mental health and wellbeing. We know we're in a youth mental health crisis and how we can best support them. And we need to learn as educators, how do we balance those tools and strategies, and particularly tech tools and strategies, without abandoning fundamental human skills, because that is still essential to their growth and development while they're in school to prepare them for, you know, quote unquote, the real world.
Yeah.
But we need to find a balance so that we're still meeting their needs and their learning styles, but also making sure we're embedding those human skills in what we're doing.
Yeah. So let's think about teaching strategies that are specific for Gen Z, and maybe they're just little iterations or alterations we can make in our classroom. And I think the first one is something that we would all naturally be present in our classrooms, and it's the use of technology. Gen Z are tech natives and respond really well to technology, but we're also hearing a lot of feedback that I guess removing the human portion of teaching completely is making for quote unquote more boring classrooms from the perception directly from Gen Z.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to bring our human but also weave in technology as well. So it's that kind of meeting place.
Strategy number 2. Real world scenarios and experimental learning. We love to be able to see it in real life, and that's when you put them scenarios into play, into a lesson, we no longer have the question of, oh, why does this matter, right?
We need
And if we can't, I was just going to say, if we can't provide a real world scenario, which in most circumstances we will be able to, but if we can't, provide a rationale for why we're learning this specific skill.
Absolutely. We can also really encourage creative thinking and critical thinking in any way that we can. So inviting students to challenge the question, to get curious, to ask questions, and like, I don't want to say like answer back, but invite that debate kind of culture in our classroom to get them really engaged and thinking about what it is that they're learning, and constantly and always advocating for human first, putting their relationship first, looking after our young people's mental health and well-being. We know we can't learn in an environment that isn't safe, that they don't feel belonging. So making sure that we prioritize that is going to help us set up the foundation for supporting Gen Z through their schooling.
Yeah.
Our theory has remained the same, that teaching Gen Z is dynamic. What works in 2025 may not work in 2026. What works for Gen Z may not work for Gen Alpha.
And we are going to go into this deeper in future episodes and unpack more specific strategies and how we can utilize them. But this was really just a snapshot of Gen Z, how they differ as a generation that we're currently teaching and seeing in our classrooms, and just a few tips and tricks that we can be using to support them.
And if we're unsure, listening is number 1, empathy is number 2, and always choose curiosity over judgment.
We are Podclass. Thank you so much for joining us.
We will see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Thanks so much for tuning into Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would adore it if you could go on to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. 5 stars would be lovely. We would love to get this podcast into as many ears as possible so we can help and support as many people as possible who help young people. And if you're not already doing so, please go along to Instagram and follow us at podclass.aus.